Good afternoon, everybody. Oh, I've got a bit of feedback coming in my ear there. I don't know what's going on there. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. And for those of you that don't know, I'm Julie Mordue and I'm Head of Marketing and Partnerships at Green Bean. And I have the pleasure of interviewing people from our industry every month and putting them under the spotlight, getting to learn a little bit more about them, about the career, and what it is that they actually do within their organisation. So it's all part of our passion and mission to build meaningful careers within the contact centre sector and, you know, promoting the industry as a career of choice. So welcome everybody. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Tony Neal, and Tony works for the NHS BSA. I've met Tony on a few occasions, generally whilst I've been judging the NHS BSA for some of the North East Contact Centre Awards, and I've had the privilege of finding out a little bit more about their ED&I networks, of which I'm super excited to invite Tony today to talk about his career, how he gets involved in the ED&I networks, and what that involves and what challenges he himself has faced throughout his career. So rather than me telling you all about the networks and everything that Tony's involved in, I'm going to now welcome Tony. Thanks so much for joining us today. And tell me a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Julie. Thanks for the big up there. As Julie's already said, I'm Tony Neal. I work for the NHS Business Services Authority. For the BSA, I'm co-chair of Disability and Neurodiverse Lived Experience Network. I'm also a Menopause champion, Freedom to Speak Up champion, and I also currently sit on the NHS BSA Shadow Board.
Sounds pretty impressive. How do you fit that all in around your day job?
Very badly, Julie. No, it's quite easy. I mean, the easiest way to explain it is when you're doing something that you feel so passionate about, it's not like you're working. And I know that's like an old stereotypical cliche about, you know, you never work a day in your life, but the passion, do you know what I mean? The passion for these things, and it makes the days shorter. It makes it so much easier to fit everything in.
Fab. Fantastic. So tell me a little bit about your current role at NHS BSA and about the journey of how you got to where you are now.
Right. Current role, I'm the Governance and Assurance Manager for the NHS BSA. Basically what that entails is I'm responsible for all sort of agreements and monitoring the agreements, keep an eye on the agreements with the Department of Health, NHS England, etc. And we monitor them within the team. It's been a long journey to get here, Julie. 31 years in the making. I started off when the NHS BSA was the Prescription Pricing Authority. There'll be a lot of people hopefully listening in who remember the PPA all the way back in 1992. I know people will think I'm not old enough to have worked here that long, but I am. 31 years in the making. So I started off pricing prescriptions. I went to work at the low income scheme, assessing HC1 forms. From there, I started on the contact centre for the NHS BSA. So when we first started, there were 2 teams, and I was on team 2 out of team 1 and 2. Moved to one of the support teams, and I've ended up here within governance.
Fantastic. So you've been on quite a journey, and your participation in the D&I groups and the lived experience networks came because of a personal challenge you came across. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about that, Tony?
Yeah, I mean, probably something to explain that I'm neurodiverse. I have ASD, ADHD, and also suffer a little bit from Tourette's. That only sort of surfaces itself, Julie, when I'm really anxious, really nervous. But I've kind of had to mask that for a long time. And obviously, as a lot of neurodiverse people will state, you spend a lot of your life masking. So it all came to the head when I obviously went through the ASD, autism diagnosis, and we moved on from there. And I've only recently just been diagnosed with ADHD on top of those.
Okay. And how does that impact your day-to-day life?
I would like to say it doesn't, but clearly it does. It's hard to explain how it impacts my life because this would be my journey, and what my journey will be about and how it kind of affects me and so on. It means I have to work harder. I have to maintain focus harder. So there will be times within this little chat where my mind wanders off and you've got to almost reel me back into the room, because it's almost as if you're having to work twice as hard. And I think that's where it came from. I've always known that, I didn't really fit into that, like, is it sort of round pegs into square holes or vice versa. So it impacts it a lot. It impacts it a lot when I feel as though I have to keep the mask up. And when I say a mask, it's almost as if, to explain to neurotypical people or even neurodiverse people will be nodding along. You almost bring something down to say, this is the person you expect me to be. However, there's a lot going on. My easiest explanation and definition is, when you see a swan gliding over the water or a duck, but the feet are going like that underneath. And that's kind of what it's like a lot, having neurodiversity.
Okay, and you've just more recently come to light the Tourette's, and obviously that has significantly had an increase in awareness since Lewis Capaldi on Glastonbury.
Yeah.
So that was in later life for you as well.
Yeah, I mean, it was lovely. I was it was lovely to watch. It wasn't nice to see someone struggling so much with it, but for someone who has Tourette's, who can, there was examples of him who was singing his song and he couldn't go through with the words. The words were just not there for him to sing. You could see his physical tics on the stage. Now, that would be because he's had that heightened sense of anxiety, and sometimes when I get that, it's more so when I'm home after a day in the office where my tics will surface, and my tics are a little bit different, where they'll be similar to what Lewis's were, a lot of sort of physical movements, a lot of verbal movements, but because you spend all that day in the office, you kind of almost let go, Julie, when you're outside of the office. And I think in Lewis's defense, and although it was fabulous for someone who has the same to see that, it was hard also to see, because you know how much he's struggling, how much harder he's having to work through his Tourette's as, say, the artist that was on before or the artist was on after, who may be neurotypical.
Yeah, so, absolutely. Absolutely. It was very painful to watch, but it has sort of, opened people's minds to Tourette's, because I think a lot of people think about Tourette's as it's somebody just involuntary swearing all the time, but it can be so much more than that, in terms of the tics and how it affects people and how stress can bring it on as well.
No, totally. You can see that. And it was inspirational to think that he could get up on that stage at Glastonbury, suffering from it, battling through it, and come out at the end successfully, and it's testament to the bloke for doing it. I wouldn't have liked to have put myself in that position.
Absolutely. It's bad enough for us having to do LinkedIn Live.
Yeah,
so you play so many different roles within the BSA. So I just want to go into a little bit more detail about some of them. So obviously you're co-chair of the Disability and Neurodiversity Network. But first of all, an interesting one is you're a menopause champion. What does that mean? What's that all about?
Well, yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, it came to light when we created a sort of a menopause champions network, and it went out there. I think it shows that the NHSB is in such a good light that they'd be so ahead of the time almost by having that as a lived experience network, but also by allowing male menopause champions to join the network. I guess quite a lot, normally by men, to be honest with you. But why would you be a menopause champion? It's almost to say, well, why not? We don't have the physical symptoms, but we can live through that, whether or not be through wives, partners, children, parents, even. Do you know what I mean? And it's we've just recently become independently accredited in the menopause for sort of I think it was a menopause confident employer status that we've achieved at the NHS BSA. And I've always thought, if I could help one person in any way, as little as that may seem, you're making a difference to someone.
Absolutely. So you're not only a great ally for your colleagues, but you're a great ally for your wife, for your children, your daughter as she grows
Yeah.
up. It's just having that greater awareness, isn't it?
It is, and if I was being honest, I would probably think, why can't there be more? Why can't we have more male menopause champions? Who you get that understanding of it. You can get that insight into what could be going on or what is going on. And I mean, you think of the stereotypes of someone who's perimenopausal or menopausal, and it's all hot flushes and so on. Yeah, I think what blew my mind was the introductory meeting and hearing people who are suffering with menopause talk about the in excess of 100 different symptoms. And why shouldn't we be? So half the population, in theory, will suffer from menopause at some time. So yeah, why not?
Yeah, excellent. Well done on you. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And your other role, Freedom to Speak Up champion. What's
Yeah.
that?
Freedom to Speak Up champion. It used to be known back in the day as kind of whistleblowing. If you thought something within, something was going wrong within the business, or if you wanted to make improvements within the business, is to create that environment at the NHS BSA where people aren't afraid to speak up, speak out. There's a lot of organisations where people will fear that if they speak up, speak out, it will go against them. So we kind of cultivated a more open speaking environment here, so people feel willing to speak up and able to speak up, and that there's going to be no kind of backwash or no kind of consequences to speaking up, because I think it's how we all improve. If someone has an idea or someone doesn't like something that's getting run or something that's happening, if they bring that up, then it all leads to an improvement, creates that better working environment, Julie.
Yeah, excellent. And moving on to your lived experience network. So it's the Disability and Neurodiversity Network. Have I got that right?
Yeah, you have Disability Neurodiversity Network. Yeah, I joined the network. A little bit. I'll go a little bit into my sort of role to join the network. I was off on the sick for a considerable length of time during COVID because I had what's known as kind of autistic burnout.
Okay.
Really struggled with that. I couldn't come to terms or cope with the constant change throughout sort of, the whole COVID experience of having to wait till tea time to know what you could do the next day. And that just blew my mind. It literally, I couldn't cope with it. So when I returned from obviously being absent, I decided to join the network just as a member of the network to see if there was anything that I could learn, gain, or provide to other network members. And then the opportunity came up to be co-chair, which I applied for and got. And it's, like I said before, similar to the Freedom to Speak Up, it's about cultivating a network of lived experience where everybody can be themselves. Do you know what I mean? We have obviously strategic goals here at the NHS BSA, and we have, our values. And I think a lot of them can be seen to be run quite smoothly through the lived experience.
And what do you do within these lived experience groups? What does that entail? Is it where you get together on teams, in person, or what does it entail?
Well, I mean, mainly now at the NHS BSA, a lot of staff working within sort of the hybrid way of working, where a lot of us are at home or in the office. So how it works with the lived experience, we used to have a monthly meeting every month that was quite agendaed and it was quite structured, and it was running through an agenda and getting updates from what were wellbeing and inclusion, now the colleague experience team. And we would run through the agenda. Now everybody has a voice within the network, and not everybody will join on Teams. A lot of people will like to see the minutes from that and so on and so forth. So what we do is we have a Teams meeting every sort of month or every other month. So like we have a structured meeting one month. The next month, what we found best work within our lived experience network, Julie, was to have an almost just a free for all. That's it, one of a better phrase. Put it on the right phrase, but for want of a better phrase, where everybody can just come, everybody can be themselves, everybody can just talk about what they want to talk about. And I think you learn so much from that, because to be a member of it, you have to have a lived experience. And what we like to sort of obviously portray to the network is you don't necessarily have to be disabled or neurodiverse, but if you have that lived experience, albeit as a carer or a son of someone who has it, or partner or parent, brother, sister, so on. So we get a lot of benefit out of that. And there's a lot of learning to be done because we share our lived experience. So even though two autistic people may be diagnosed with autistic, they could be so far apart on the spectrum
Yeah.
that it's nice to sort of get some kind of direction and learning from that.
And how do you take that back to the wider business you're learning and to raise awareness of the different networks?
Yeah, I mean, I've been fortunate to be involved in sort of training for sort of talent acquisition, for managers training. We've done a little piece towards the end of last year where it was to try and to give managers that kind of insight into interviewing someone who is neurodiverse. So we can feed that back, and that'll be rolled out throughout the whole of the NHS BSA just to managers or people who are going to interviewing you, because as we all know, we all portray differently. Whereas I can talk a lot and move my hands and so on and be quite off-putting, whereas a lot of people within an interview won't make eye contact, which is one of the the big things for someone who's autistic. And for me, I had a large conversation with an outside charity outside of the NHS BSA where sometimes where if I make eye contact and I'm looking at you in the eyes, I'm not thinking about what you're saying or listening. All I'm doing is thinking about making eye contact with the person who's interviewing you. So we've done a lot of that, and where to try and look for. You may be interviewing someone who may look uncomfortable, but they're not necessarily uncomfortable. They may be neurodiverse and just not happy in that situation.
Yeah.
Because you're almost, well, we all know what interviews are like, Julie. It doesn't really give a good reflection of ourselves in that sphere anyway. So it's just a little bit of work on that. And I've also been fortunate enough to do what we do at the NHS BSA, some reciprocal mentoring with our senior leaders. So I was fortunate enough to do mine with a colleague at the NHS BSA, and that colleague sits on the board, he sits on the shadow board, he's a member of the leadership team, and to portray my whole way of working and thinking. Now, obviously, that's felt back at the very top. That does filter down to say, they're appreciative of the fact that someone who is neurodiverse might be working twice as hard to do the same thing in the same time as someone who's neurotypical. So it all has ways of kind of filtering down, as well as, the minutes, as well as being, within the network. I know we mentioned we have monthly meetings. We also do week care cafes. We also, we have initiatives throughout the year that we'll almost sponsor. We'll have a week of doing that. We've got British Sign Language coming up. We've just had Carers Week. We also make a big thing about sponsoring Disability History Month, which kind of runs from about the 18th of November to the 18th of December, where we have speakers come in and, we promote them, similar to what we're doing now, where we'll get someone to come in and we'll get them to engage and talk and stuff like that. So it all has its assets to the NHS BSA, and it all filters down.
Yeah, it all helps to make everybody better allies at work, doesn't it? And
And
better allies at home as well.
Yeah, definitely. And it creates that environment where I think sort of, the chief exec and his sort of senior leadership team have created that environment within the NHS BSA where we can be ourselves. It allows our people to be ourselves. That's part of our strategy, part of our goals, initiatives, and it does create that environment.
And I think the reciprocal mentoring is such a powerful initiative. So that is really, really good.
I've
Say that.
learned so much from it, Julie.
Yeah. And moving on to what is this shadow board? I mean, you and I have talked, but tell us a little bit for anybody that does it outside of the BSA and that hasn't met you, what is being part of a shadow board?
Well, shadow board, it mirrors in numbers and it mirrors in sort of members the main board of the NHS BSA. So we have the chair, and obviously the chair of the main board is the chair of the shadow board. We have the chief exec, who is a member of both boards, and we have the executive director of people, who is also a member of both boards. Within that as well, we have sort of 4 ring-fence posts for members of our lived experience community. So I'm fortunate enough, privileged enough to be part of the shadow board through being a member and a co-chair of the D&ND network. So what they do is it meets kind of, say, for example, it's the day before every main NHS board meeting. We go through the papers, we review the papers, we look into the papers. And
so you get to see the actual board papers?
Yeah, we get to see the actual board papers. We get to run through the actual pack that will go to the main board with the non-executive directors and everyone the next day. So we get to review them, we get to contribute. And one of the other privileges of being a member of the shadow board is it's sort of like 2 of us from shadow board get to attend the main board the next day. So we take our turns and go on, and it's fascinating to be part of something that shapes the way the organisation is moving. What is coming up, what is happening, why we do what we do. So I find the shadow board stuff fascinating on top of everything else, but it's that insight into stuff that you wouldn't normally have an insight into, because it's only the board members that would.
Yeah, exactly. And are you responsible for then filtering that message down, or do you have to keep that confidential, or what's the process after you've been to one of these board meetings?
Normally the majority of it's confidential, because it hasn't been the board the next day, and it's up to the board to decide whether or not they agree to stuff and vote on stuff and so on. If I'm able to filter anything down then or even up, I can, depending upon where that would go within the NHS BSA. So it's a privileged position, Julie. I'm not going to deny that it isn't. It really isn't. For someone who's came on my journey to get there as a member of staff within the contact centre before moving to governance, quite proud of myself for achieving that, if I'm being honest. And the fact that I got to sit on there and know all about what was happening in not just the contact centre, but the whole of the NHS BSA.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. Thank you for sharing that. So I just want to remind anybody that's listening, please feel free to put your comments or any questions that you've got for Tony, particularly around the lived experience networks. We will try and get to them. So please use this as an interactive session to pick Tony's brains, for want of a better phrase. So we know what prompted you to get involved with many of the networks. Oh, you've got an ally there. Dan Britton's just said he should be very proud, Tony. Well deserved. That's lovely.
Thanks,
that's praise indeed, coming from, is he the associate or assistant director of operations? Pretty big guns, isn't he? Yeah. So that's really good praise indeed.
I've known Dan a long time, and for Dan, Dan started the same place as me. We started within the contact centre, and we've I'm working my way up, and he's worked his way up. So
yeah, fantastic.
Thanks for that, Dan.
So you obviously you've got your own neurodivergent journey, and you've talked about why you got involved in as a menopause champion. In your experience, what are some of the common challenges or misconceptions surrounding these lived experience networks?
I mean, it can be different depending upon which lived experience network. The menopause champion, it's almost as if, why is there a male member of staff as a menopause champion? And I said before, I said, why not? We share that lived experience, maybe he's not physically in it, and that can be, a misconception to start with. And you're never going to get away from, sometimes when you go to the GP, if you're a female, you'll want to see a female doctor. If you're male, and I appreciate that sometimes within the NHS BSA that, female members of staff will want to speak to a female menopause champion, but they may want to speak to a male menopause champion and think, this is me, I am perimenopausal. How will my husband be thinking? What can I do to help my husband understand?
Yeah.
And having that lived experience of it, Julie, will it's got to help. And like I said before, if I can help one person by doing it, then, it's a deed well done. In fairness, I think the misconceptions regarding DND is because I'm autistic, we all present differently. Some of us do stuff completely different. Some of us think, the amount of times where I've been asked, it's like, you don't look autistic, or told you don't look autistic. Are you sure you're autistic? Are you sure that you've got ADHD? Are you sure that you've got Tourette? Because sometimes I might not portray what the stereotypical thoughts of that are.
Because I guess stereotypical is naughty boy.
Yeah, basically, yeah. And there's that one where, like women can't be autistic. Well, women can be autistic. And then it's always young boys. And it's kind of like, well, I've been asked before, how did you become autistic? It's like, well, you don't become autistic. You're born. It's a lifelong condition which you have from the day you're born till the day you die, and we all deal with it differently. Another one is people think you're all mathematicians, and I'm clearly not. And a lot of people don't speak. A lot of people like me will monologue and they'll never shut up, Juliet, and that's part and parcel of it. We're all different, but people view that, differently. People look at it differently. People think of it differently. But yeah, there's a couple of ones, like that one of you don't appear autistic, you don't look autistic. And like I say, I mean, what can you say to that? What can I say to that? I mean, what does an autistic person look like? What does someone who's had ADHD look like? We're just like a neurotypical person. We just have to work harder. That's my view on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Chase the butterflies and look for the foxes. Woo!
Yeah, definitely.
So how do you collaborate with other departments to ensure that the lived experience network grows and is successful and that it's integrated into the broader framework of the BSA?
I think to sort of answer that, I think the reciprocal mentoring helped a lot. And it wasn't just a one-off. I was part of the first cohort, fortunately, and the person that I was mentoring with has a quite high position. So that doesn't just stay with them, it filters down, it filters across, filters across leadership team, and it moves down. And we also kind of build allyships with other networks, and we've just basically agreed to help the BAME network with something that they've got coming up for sort of Black History Month. So what we would do is, we do have members of our network who are also members of the BAME network, but it's that crossover between what someone has of the BAME living experience and a disabled or neurodiverse living experience, to share that amongst their lived experience networks, but it also filters down. And I think going back to sort of the reciprocal mentoring bit, it's kind of like, because there were sort of 7 or 8 of us in an initial one from all different lived experience networks. And as part of our leadership team, part of our board, I can't help but create that environment where it all filters down, and hopefully it does. Hopefully it does, Julie.
So have you got any examples of a successful outcome or a positive impact resulting from your efforts as part of the lived experience networks?
I think where I find the most positive is when people will come to me and a kind of almost a freedom to speak up, D&ND crossover, and they'll ask for my opinion and they'll ask for a way of dealing with it, and that comes from putting myself in front of people and saying, this is me. And I think if you're open and honest with people about your lived experience, you can almost share that with them, that they'll be willing to approach you and think, Tony has done it, why can't I? Which is the best way? So there's a lot of crossover I find between the freedom to speak up and the D&ND.
Yeah.
And kind of helping people, which is the best sort of outcome for what they desire, what they want. Because with it, the NHS BSA, I'm not aware of everybody who has a work-based passport where it's written down that you would have to adhere to, like it kind of follows you around the NHS BSA with, say, for example, someone might have to have 3 breaks a day instead of 2 breaks a day, or they may split their breaks. So it's known that I'm here if anybody did need to come for that. And I think that's the best example of a crossover I can give of helping people. So people feel stuck sometimes, and it's trying almost to help them out of that feeling stuck.
Yeah. And I mean, it sounds like you've got a super engaged senior leadership team, obviously through the reciprocal mentoring, through your shadow board. But how do you engage with other members of the senior leadership team to gain their support and the commitment towards creating an inclusive culture?
I mean, we do have we have committee meetings where, like sort of the colleague experience team, HR and what have you will be present at, and that can filter off that way. We've also done presentations, we do cafes, and it's trying to get as many of people to come as possible who can just listen to us talking about struggles that their staff may be having or may be facing. And also, when I was helping out within the contact centre, it's been part of like the colleague engagement team within the contact centre, just trying to pass that across, doing a kind of almost a presentation, an introductory sort of module kind of thing to say to managers, look, it's just the signs to look for, and just to make them aware of, where stuff is on our, our internal hub, internet, as we would call it, how they can find that, where they can get the help, and just always being available.
Available at signpost, great advice. And you'll initially address some of the related issues within the organisation. You're doing a lot of awareness. We've talked about how you've helped with the recruitment teams of talking to them about how a neurodivergent would go through the interview process. Have you got any other examples of resources or tools or policies that you've helped to introduce or advocate throughout the business from the networks that you've pulled all this information from?
Yeah, there's a lot of our network members who came to me in the past, Julia, and they've said they may struggle with kind of full-time working. Myself, I struggled with full-time work, and I only used to work 3 days a week because that's all I could manage at that time. So we're quite positive in creating with sort of, like part-time work and flexible work. And a lot of people ask me, externally from the NHS BSA, do you not advertise part-time roles? Because there's a lot of people who might only want to work 10 till 2. So we've done a lot of work on that sort of last year, and just to try and create that that job advert to advertise to almost say, you are part-time. Because in my opinion, if we're not, we're missing out on an awful lot of society who couldn't apply to the BSA.
Yeah.
Because they would say full-time and they would say fixed hours or something like that. But within the NHS BSA, we've got that flexible working environment, and we've worked with various different teams to think what works best for myself, what works best for other people, what could work best for that. And even just being part of kind of room design almost, because I don't know what other people are like, but sometimes, I hear everything that's going on. If I'm sitting at my desk, from days of the contact center, I'm dealing with my call and my query and my questions, but I can hear 5 or 6 other going on. So it's listening to the fact that we get double headsets available when required, we get partitions up, and we look to maybe, encourage management to sit staff who may have neurodiverse tendencies or maybe neurodiverse, so maybe, in a position where it's not going to be as noisy. So we've built into sort of a lot of stuff of that. We're also part and parcel of, contributing to our own diversity inclusion strategy, which I've only recently just been asked to contribute to as part of the reciprocal mentoring. So it's kind of a little bit within that. There'll be a bit on my journey through the reciprocal mentoring.
Excellent, great. And we've obviously you're heavily invested, the lived experiences, but where do you go to keep your knowledge up to date of fresh research or continued learning about any of the networks? Where do you go for that?
I mean, we have some great co-chairs, the Menopause Champions co-chairs that, they won't mind me saying it, the perimenopausal or menopausal women who are constantly looking at change and looking at outcomes. And we do in the sort of the champions meetings, which we'd have once a month, we'll kind of, everybody will talk about different medications or a holistic approach or herbal approach. We also have at the NHS BSA like a Yammer channel for each individual network and each individual directorate. And that's kind of like, if people don't listen and who are watching who don't use Yammer, it's kind of like just Facebook, but for work. So there's constantly stuff on there, and it could be something as simple as someone's on a TV program. So we'll share a link to the TV program. We'll monitor any changes. Personally speaking, when it comes to disabled and neurodiverse network, I learn a lot from my wife. My wife is very invested in, looking after my youngest daughter who's autistic, and she does a lot of research. So I kind of learn through my wife that obviously bring it back into work, and I've seen this, or there's this and there's this. So there's constant stuff like that. Julie, to be honest with you, textbooks, we buy a lot of textbooks that we share, openly within a library. If anybody wanted to read one or use one, we can do that. So, we're always looking at ways that we can improve the networks, grow the networks.
Yeah, excellent. And it hasn't we've talked about your successes, but it hasn't always been plain sailing for you, has it, Tony? And we've talked about this previously. Tell us about your journey to being a mental health advisor.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I'll start at the very beginning. I always struggled a lot with my mental health, late teens, early 20s into 30s. And I always thought it was sort of depression, anxiety, and it was. But it wasn't until I got my diagnosis with ASD that everything made sense.
And what's ASD stand for, Tony?
Autism spectrum disorder.
Okay.
So once I got that diagnosis, it was like a light bulb moment. Same with ADHD when I got that diagnosis. Although it's sad to be sort of told that you have this, everything that's went before that made sense. So I had years of doctors trying to treat us with for depression, for anxiety, every single different medication you could want. I've tried, and it's it's not worked. But to get that diagnosis and to get support externally for my autism, it was almost like, almost like you were born again, and it's not been an easy journey. And I thought, at the time, and we've discussed this before, I went through sort of the mental health first aider training within the NHS BSA because we have that lived experience networks. And I'd done that. But to be honest with you, that to me, it was kind of as if I felt I couldn't give back what I would want to give back because it was so close to the experiences I'd had. And a lot of people found benefit from that, and they found benefit from being a mental health first aider, that they can share their lived experience back into the network to help others who would be struggling. For me, it was just, I felt like I couldn't do it justice as well as other people could. And I kind of took a step back from doing that at the time. Do you know what I mean? But I would still offer to help anybody because I've had the training, and I think I'm still down as a mental health first aider. In fact, I know I am, but I don't kind of advocate for that at the moment because I just feel like that one thing too many for me at the moment.
And I think that is so important, is to recognize when, things are too much, and that to be authentic and transparent about, I've took too much on, I can't give it my all, and it's not a failure, it's just I can't support people as much as I would like to.
And I think it's nice of you to say that, and I think that's how I felt at the moment at that time. And I just felt like I couldn't do it justice.
Yeah.
We've got some fabulous mental health first aiders within the NHS BSA, and I felt like I would never get to that level because I just couldn't give it what I wanted to give it. I thought I could have, I thought I would be able to do it. And, that a lot of people say, that lived experience of having, mental health issues over the years does help. But for me, it was just, I'm trying to think of a phrase to say, a bit too close to home. Almost, it was as if I couldn't do that person who would want to contact me justice. And that's not, with me, it's either like, yes, we'll do this justice, you get it 100%, or I wouldn't do it because then I'm not doing anybody any favors. I think that's why I stepped back a little bit from that, Julia.
And how's your mental health right now, Tony?
Can I
In
tell
a
you
good
the end of
place?
this? Can I tell you the end of this?
It's probably been on the verge, coming onto alive.
I think it's in a really good place. I think almost changing careers has helped that. We all like to change, even though someone who is autistic, who religiously hates change and never wants anything to change, it's probably the biggest change I've had in a long time, and it's going really well. I'm okay, but
Great.
you can ask us again later.
Okay, fab to know that. So what's your plans now and your goals for your future role? Tell us a little bit more about what you do, and on your day-to-day job, what's a governance and assurance manager, and what your plans are to take that further.
Well, we're kind of responsible. We have like sort of an audit risk committee within the NHS BSA. That just says what it says on the tin. My responsibility for that is kind of sorting out the agenda, making sure everybody's got the papers in, minute and that. So I'm responsible for that. I'm responsible for directions and agreements that we get, like I mentioned earlier, so they can be in, MOUs or SLAs or any kind of direction that might come from the Department of Health. So my responsibility is that they are signed by both parties. We keep them in a central register. People can access to them, and they're signed appropriately. Because obviously we can't be contracted to do work for the NHS, but we have memorandums of understanding and the directions from them for the work that we do within the NHS BSA. As for the future, who knows? I really enjoy it. I really enjoy the governance side of stuff. We do a lot of work on risk management, which I really enjoy. I enjoy, managing risk. It's something I hope to be successful at, and I'm doing an okay job of it so far, I hope.
Are you pleased you weren't managing the risk pre-COVID when you were going into that COVID boom?
So, I was kind of looking back. you know, looking back and, you know, to big up the NHS business, you know, the BSA, we dealt with it so well. I can remember coming into work one day and it was as if, right, let's get everybody home. Let's get everybody home now. As an organisation, you know, we all had, you know, we invested in laptops, we invested in new headsets, we invested in, you know, new telephone systems and all this kind of things. That's just from the small part of the business, which is the contact centre.
Yeah.
And, you know, we worked through that, which was a success. The only thing I didn't enjoy was when I used to take my dog for a walk on lunchtime and I could see everybody was on furlough, sitting in the garden, sitting in the yards, drinking cans.
I
And I'm
know.
thinking, I'm working here. I've got like sort of 30 minutes for my lunch
I
and I've
know.
got to get back.
Absolutely.
But yeah, hopefully it's onwards and upwards, you know. And I've
Fantastic.
recently just become a trustee of a charity in the Northeast.
Fantastic. Which charity is that?
Yeah, it's Disability North. It's a little charity. We're based over next to the Freeman Hospital. And I love that. I love that kind of being able to help, you know, even if it's one person, you know, and the reasons why I help, you know, I've been asked that loads of different times, Julie, why do you do what you do? Why do you help? And I think it's because I've always had to fight, you know, whether it be at school, whether it be in adolescence, whether it be in adulthood, whether it be for my children, you know, for my wife, for my family. You've always had to fight. And if my fighting stops someone else having to fight for something, then it's all good, you know. So it's onwards and upwards from here. I'm in a good place at the moment. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, congratulations. You've had a fabulous career. And I think it's really inspiring for people listening to this to know that coming from a contact centre and all of the experience and knowledge that you've gained within the contact centre, but the other paths that are available to you, and you've moved completely into a different area of risk and assurance. And a lot of people looking at a contact centre wouldn't imagine those kind of roles exist behind you know, behind the headset, I guess.
No, and I think it's phenomenal the amount of stuff that goes on behind the headset, you know, and I think people would sometimes be put off by making that jump. But there's an awful lot of senior leaders within the NHS BSA who have went through that route, who have started off within the contact centre, who have progressed. You know, it is good and the access is there, and we do have career pathways within the contact centre, you know, within the citizen services sphere, which people can do to get that sort of taste rather than, you know, that initial sort of jump. You can go on a pathway to do it. So yeah, I think it's a very good place to work, Julie.
Excellent. Yes. Well, Tony, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you to everybody that's listening in today, and thank you to those that are going to be listening on replay, because I know that's where we get the majority of our views, is once we're not live and we've got a glass of wine or a cup of coffee in our hands, and everybody else can watch it at their leisure. So thank you so much for your time today, and we'll be back with Green Bean. We'll be interviewing somebody else in August, putting them in the spotlight. So thanks very much, everyone, for joining us, and thanks so much, Tony, and we'll see you again soon.
Thanks for having me, Julie. Thank you.